My name is Dr. Christine Ranck, and this is my show, my weekly talk show on Yackit. And so before I do anything, I want to thank Yackit for having me. This marvelous technology is absolutely incredible. And I hope that whoever is listening will take the opportunity to join us, because you can get on live with your webcam and actually talk to us. And I would be delighted to have you come and visit with us. But in the meantime, I want to start to talk about igniting your brain and changing your world. And I want to tell you about this incredible thing that you have that's called your brain. It makes me downright weepy talking about it. Your brain is the most complex organism in the entire universe. It has as many connections in it as there are stars. Maybe more than there are stars. And it's the only organ in your body that cannot move on its own. It's completely encased in bone, and so it can't move. And possibly that might be the very reason why we can travel to the furthest reaches of the cosmos. And not only that, but change our very anatomy, our brain's very anatomy, just by using our imagination. That because our brain is stuck in this case, it is decided that it is going to allow infinite movement for our thoughts. Packed into that pink lump of tofu-like stuff is one of the most advanced, if not the greatest density of orderly design anywhere, anytime, any place. The wiring that we have in our brain could go around the world twice. And no light ever reaches our brain. It comes into our eyes. The light comes into our eyes and is turned into electrical signals that go into the back of the brain and are interpreted there. So no light ever gets in directly. No light ever gets into the brain unless you have brain surgery. And yet, what do we see when we look out of our eyes? We see magnificent colors. We see the light of a candle. We see the incredible sunsets, the incredible sunrises. Where does that come from? The brain creates that for us, even though it never has any direct experience with any of those things. So you are already a genius of creation, adaptation, and survival. You're a genius. The problem is that most of that genius is hidden away, hidden from our view. And we haven't had many tools to be able to access these deepest parts of our brain and to access the deep patterns that connect us with the rest of the universe. But we're starting now to have tools to ignite the brain in the way that I'm talking about. We no longer see ourselves as solid bodies. We think of ourselves now in the 21st century as atoms, a collection of particles, and composed of subatomic particles and mostly empty space that's moving around in space-time. We're not just a body. We're more like a mind body. And that's the way we think about ourselves and need to think about ourselves. If you think about Michelangelo's famous statue, beautiful, magnificent statue, the David. If you think about what that statue looks like, and Michelangelo famously said, David was already in the stone. I just had to reveal him. I just had to carve away all of the stuff that wasn't David, but that David was already in the stone. And that is true for all of us. Everything we need is inside of us. We just haven't had access to it, and it's a process of revealing what's in there that is the work of the 21st century. I just want to comment a little bit on a broader perspective on things. So, for example, the person that you love is 78.53% water. The person you love is 78.53% water. Puts a little bit of perspective on things. Deeper than that, the person that you love is mostly empty space. In fact, if we took all the empty space out of a human body, everything that's solid would fit into a teaspoon. The person you love is mostly empty space. The reason for that is that when you take an atom, we're made up of atoms, and if you expanded an atom to the size of a football field, the nucleus of that atom would only be the size of a piece of rice. And the electrons and protons that revolve around that atom would be revolving around the perimeter of the football field with a nucleus that's the size of a piece of rice, a grain of rice. And all of the rest of it is empty space. So if you collapsed all of that, all the atoms that we're made of, that's what's left. And finally, deeper than that, you go down all the way down to the bottom of everything, to the particles that we're made of, and then deeper than that, and so you keep pulling it apart. Quantum physicists keep doing that, and what we find is that there's absolutely nothing there except light and consciousness. The person you love is made up of light and consciousness. There's really no there. And science is really just only a breath away from proving that the ground of all being is not matter, not the solid, hard stuff that we're talking about, not this computer and the tables that we're used to and the solid, hard stuff. It's not that. It's not what we've always thought. That the ground of all being, the unifying basis of the entire universe, is actually consciousness. Okay, so you already have everything that you need inside of you, and the answers are already there. And I just want to check in with my colleague, Brook Sheldon, because you're sitting there so patiently, and I so appreciate you being here, and I'm not meaning to put you on the spot, but I did want to say hello to you, and I want to introduce Brook briefly. She's a radio host herself, so I'm hoping to learn a lot from her about how to host a show. But in the meantime, she's an amazing. She's also the co-founder of the Moments Count journal, which is this wonderful e-zine that I encourage you all to join. In fact, I'm going to write it down right now. Moments Count. But she's also a trauma therapist. There's a bazillion things I could say about her. So hi, Brook, and thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to let you talk if you want to. Would you like to speak? Okay.
Hey, Chris Girl. Great to be here. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little time and energy with your audience and with you. As you mentioned, as co-founder of the Moments Count Journal, my partner and I, Valerie Keller, have attempted to do exactly the kinds of things that so often are the kind of extrapolation of your work, which is to take the light and the energy that we are and turn that into the realization that we can make changes in our environment simply by putting our mind to it, putting our focus to it, and using that creativity that our brain has to be able to shine our own personal light in different ways. The Moments Count Journal, as you know, because you've contributed many times, it's been wonderful, you were one of our premier authors, is an opportunity for people to recognize the fact that every single moment that they're here, they have an opportunity to make positive change in the way that they'd like to. And as you know for a fact, when we put our minds to something and we put our intention and our energy to it, we can make changes that we never would have thought would have been possible if we had not intended to look at something, realize that there were ways or possibilities for solving the problems, and putting our energy and effort into making those changes happen. So.
Yes, thank you. And that's ultimately why getting your brain ignited is so important, because if we can change the way we see the world and understand our universe more fully, and especially now it's so exciting because we're starting to understand how the brain works, and therefore we can change the way we experience our life and pass that along to our experience in the universe in general. And if there is a change a coming, and certainly it appears that there is, then that is the change. That is the change. So what I want to do tonight is to pass along, and you and I can talk about some of the tools that we can use to get our brain ignited. And so right now I just want to put it, again, put a little bit of perspective on things and talk in the broadest sense about quantum physics, which is the most accurate physics of science of all time, and it has fascinated me since I discovered it probably 10, 12 years ago. I've been an avid student of quantum physics. But before we get there, and quantum physics sounds so scary, but it's actually not, and it's fascinating when you think about applying this incredibly accurate science that works for subatomic particles, to apply it then to our lives at this level of reality, and it can actually be done. So what I want to introduce is two things. There's consensus reality. There's this idea of consensus reality. So consensus reality would be the reality that you and I are familiar with. It's the reality of tables and mountains and bumblebees and stop signs and government and post office and all of the pretty much predictable, sometimes rigid, sometimes beautiful, roses, orangutans, everything, all of the things that we're familiar with and that aren't really very scary in terms of what we can expect from things. It's pretty predictable, and it's something that we can rely on. So that's consensus reality. Non-consensus reality is the reality that no one agrees upon. It might be the reality that would make your neighbor very uncomfortable if you said it out loud, for example. So some things that might be in consensus reality might be some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, but it could be psychic experiences, it could be angels, it could be anything, it could be emotions, because not everyone agrees about emotions. It could be anything that we don't necessarily agree on that puts us kind of out of our usual frame of reference. Synchronicities, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, and all the kind of stuff that you don't necessarily want to talk about, all the woo-woo stuff. And even though we call it woo-woo stuff, we all know that each and every one of us has had a woo-woo experience. And somewhere inside of us, we know that too is a part of our reality. So there's consensus reality, the regular stuff, the reliable stuff, and then there's this non-consensus reality, the stuff that we can't necessarily count on, but that we all know is really there. And like I said, we don't think of ourselves anymore as just a mind and just a body. We think of ourselves as a mind-body. And I have this girlfriend, her name is Roisin Fitzgerald, and Roisin Fitzpatrick. Oh, I can't believe I called her the wrong name. Anyway, she is an artist from Ireland, and she calls herself the artist of the light. And she makes the most magnificent pieces of artwork from Swarovski crystals, these beautiful, huge Swarovski crystals on white silk in these very cosmic patterns. And she calls herself the artist of the light because about 3 years ago, she had a near-death experience. She had a brain aneurysm, and she died. And she died and left her body and went out into the light. She had, the kind of standard stuff that we're hearing about all the time now, near-death experience. And then she was out there for a while, and she remembered that her parents were still alive, and that they would be devastated for her to be gone. So she made a decision to come back, not even wanting to, but she made a decision because it was so nice out there in the light. She made a decision to come back. And as she tried to come back and get into her body, she looked down on her body. They were planning to do brain surgery on her to save her. And she left before they could do that. So she was lying there, and she looked down at her body, and she thought to herself, there's no way I'm going to get back in there. I'm too big. She said, it's like being 40,000 watts trying to get into a 40-watt bulb. But she did squeeze back in, and she spent the and her aneurysm was cured. She didn't require surgery anymore, and so she said it took her a full 2 years to really have the experience of being back in her body, and that it was very painful because she had been so big. So that's a perfect example of another non-consensus reality, and that the idea that our natural state is out of body, that our natural state is out of body. And in quantum physics, this is called being non-local. It's being in the body that really takes work. But that each and every one of us is not only a local being with an address and a place and a solid things around us, but is also a non-local being that's out there in the light and way, 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 way too big. Another idea is that dreaming is a non-local experience. Just think about, where are you when you're dreaming? Well, your brain takes you to anywhere in the universe and makes absolutely anything happen. Where are you when you're dreaming? You're in a non-local state. You're out there. Where is the internet? I've used this example before. Where is the internet? This is a perfect example of these two dualities. They're not really dualities. There's the local and the non-local. So the internet it's both right here. We're on it. It's right here on your computer, right here. It has an address. But it's also sort of out there in the ether. Like, where is it? It's out there somewhere. It has no address. It's non-local. And that is the human experience. It's the combination of local and non-local, somewhere and everywhere. One last example is, where is the screen of the mind? If you close your eyes and imagine things, where are you imagining things? Where are you dreaming? Where is it? Where is that place? And the reality is that we have never, ever located that screen of the mind. We don't know where it is. It's never been located. It's non-local. And it's sort of in this place where time and space don't really exist. And it's right in that space where all of these really miraculous things happen. So the conclusion of a century of quantum physics and quantum theory is that you are non-local awareness residing temporarily in a physical body. And I want to put that into perspective, because at the subatomic level, quantum physicists have found that is absolutely the case for atoms and particles, that they are also, at the same time as they are solid, they are also non-local, spread out all over everywhere in a wave state. And the only thing that determines what state they're in is how they get looked for. So a quantum physicist is looking for a particle, and as soon as he or she looks for it, all of this energy that's sort of non-local begins to kind of collapse into this particle, into an address, instead of a non-local, no address, everywhere place. And it's the way we look at something that changes the thing we're looking at. So quantum physicists feel like that there's this energy soup behind them, and every time they try to turn around and look at it and see it, they turn around and try and catch it. And as soon as they look at it, it turns into something solid, and so they can never see the non-local aspect of it. They can never see it. And so this is the state of particles, the subatomic particles that we're made of. It is also the state of human beings. And so the premise I want to talk about tonight, and now we're going to get to the really good stuff, is that the way you look at something changes the thing you're looking at. And in quantum physics, it's the way you look at something makes it determination, turns something into a solid that was once wavy. But both experiences coexist in the same way that consensus reality and non-consensus reality exist for us at the same time. So that has applications if the way we look at things determines what we're going to see. Then we can apply that principle to ourselves, and that's what happens with our brain. So, for example, if you grow up with a very, very critical, let's say you grow up with a very critical father, and your father is constantly telling you that you're just a big dummy, whether he meant it in a cruel way or not, he's constantly saying, you're a big dummy, you're just a big, big, big dummy. And so it starts when you're young, and then by the time you get to school, you've absorbed that information, big dummy, and then you go to school, and you feel like a big dummy, and so you're quiet in the classroom, and so your teacher might think you're shy and doesn't call on you, which then reinforces for you that you must be a big dummy. And so that makes you behave more like a quote-unquote big dummy, and pretty soon you've got a full-blown belief system of I'm a big dummy, I'm not smart, I'm not good enough, whatever it is. And everything around you begins to confirm that premise, even though there's plenty of other evidence that absolutely makes that not so at all. But the brain cannot the brain cannot process two conflicting ideas. If there's a conflict, the brain picks one side and it filters out the rest. So you have a belief that you're stupid, dummy, big dummy, and even if there's evidence to the contrary all around you, your brain's going to select for you the experience of being a dummy, and you will see your experiences in life as confirming that, so that by the time you're an adult, you have this complex about being not smart enough. Do you follow me? And that is the beginnings of the premise. The way you look at something determines what you see. And it becomes a pattern. It becomes a brain pattern. It becomes like a groove in our brain. And now that we know that we can change that, we have all kinds of things that we can do. But if you've got that groove of I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, every time an experience comes up, you're going to misinterpret a lot of it because the information is going to go right down into that groove, that pathway that you've always taken. The pathway in the woods that's the biggest is the one that everybody goes on. And you're going to follow that pathway into that neural network in your brain that supports being not smart enough. And that has a profound effect on your life. But it's just a brain thing. It's just a brain thing. And now we have some tools we can actually change that. We can change it. And what's powerful about that is that since we know that the way you look at something, the way you see something changes what you're looking at, that means that if we have a new belief, that will also open up an entirely new viewpoint about your world, and begin a new process with creating neural networks that support the new belief, which is I'm smart enough, I'm good enough, and by gosh, everybody likes me. Or whatever that guy said on Saturday Night Live. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. It's like, how do we do that? How do we change our beliefs? I don't know, again, Brooke, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you would like to say something at this point, I'm sure you've had plenty of experience with exactly what I'm talking about.
There we go. Absolutely. I think one of the things that is imperative for people to think about is something that I talk to people as clients or even in situations where I'm just lecturing for people or speaking, the understanding, as you're pointing out, even though it's kind of an odd concept for people, that the brain does not make decisions or judgments about whether or not what we tell it is right or wrong or good or bad. It interprets the information no different than the way our computer does when we sit down to it. If we type, as you mentioned, Joey is a dummy, the computer doesn't judge what we've typed. It accepts it, puts it on the word process page, and that can be printed out as many times as you want to. And it's the same thing for our brain. When we go ahead and we internalize messages that are negative, then those become the truthful messages. If we internalize messages that are positive, those become the truthful messages. We place the judgment on whether or not those are true messages or false messages, but our brain does not. So if we keep hearing and having the attention forced at us that things about us are negative, or we force our own attentions at things about ourselves that are critical and constantly criticize ourselves, all we end up doing, as you're pointing out, is creating a reality for ourselves that is steeped in the message that we've allowed our mind and our brain to continue to absorb. So therefore, if someone is constantly in your life, say, giving you a negative message, what I tell people is, what you need to do is, I would suggest that if it's somebody who's in your life on a routine basis, you need to let them know, I'm not comfortable with you saying those things to me. They're not things I want to hear. They're not things that I accept about myself. And in turn, we also need to create for ourselves more affirming messages. So if somebody says, all the time, hey, stupid, come on over here, aside from the fact that we don't accept that message and ask to not have that message thrown at us, we also need to, because sometimes we can't change if somebody speaks to us that way, especially if it's an older sibling or something like that. We need to turn that around and say, I'm smart, I'm bright, I'm intelligent, I'm capable, I'm able to make decisions for myself that are good decisions, thoughtful decisions, well thought out decisions. We have to make a conscious attempt to change all of the negative messages that come in, because constantly at work, at school, at home, we don't even necessarily realize how often we get those messages. The media gives it to us all the time, for instance, and those kinds of things alter our self-perception if we do not do things to change that perception that is being laid within. So I absolutely agree with you, Chris, because we are constantly bombarded with those messages, and until we have an semblance of understanding that we are in control of not necessarily what comes at us, but then how we turn that message into something that our brain does take in, and that we in turn view that as a positive message about ourselves, it really is something that we have to take a conscious approach to, because our brain by itself is not going to do that. It's going to accept things without judgment. We need to turn that around.
Hit the done button.
Done.
So the thing is that these beliefs that we have, they are profoundly deep. I mean, to a certain extent, I think most people would say that it's easy to say, well, I'm smart. But if you have this neural network that absolutely, and starting oftentimes from childhood, we're talking about being traumatized by a thoughtless parent. And sometimes there are even bigger, obviously, much bigger traumas than that. But being chronically told negative things about yourself, that is traumatic and very damaging. And we have so now, starting from the time we're a child, we have a neural network, in our brain that supports that. And so everything, as we said, goes that direction. And so, to a certain extent, no matter how much you say, well, I know that can't be true, and I know that I'm really smart, and we try to, talk ourselves into it, but to a certain extent, we just don't believe it, because we have this profound belief underneath that is much more powerful, and is supported by a neural network that is virtually unchangeable, based on how often and how often it gets used and how deep that groove is. So what we want to do is find ways to change that belief, and that can be challenging. But the great thing is that now we have a couple of really incredible mind-body therapies that seem to be able to get into your system and literally allow you to what I call, it's really kind of a kind of time travel, where you reach back into your past and you revisit some of those traumatic memories. And with the help of bilateral stimulation, which is any kind of right-left stimulation of your body, which has a profound effect on the brain that we don't exactly understand. But bilateral stimulation gets the two hemispheres kind of talking in a way that they don't usually, and distracts our thinking brain and allows us access to a deeper part of our brain. And so if, for example, we have some sort of bilateral stimulation going on, so it could be eye movements back and forth, or it could be tapping on your knees, right, left, or it could be a sound track that instead of stereo, it goes from right to left, back and forth. So you have very gentle sound going back and forth. And when you have that going, it does a lot of things that distract the brain and allow you access into that neural network in some way that we don't quite understand yet. So you can go back in there, for example, see your father saying these horrible things to you, and not let him get away with it. Bring your adult self into that picture first in some way. Do all kinds of things to change the way you come away from that experience. You can't change what actually happened, but you can change the beliefs that you walk away with that filter through your system and cause so much havoc when you're older. And yes, Brooke.
Aspect of creating bilateral stimulation, that ability to activate both hemispheres of the brain. People don't often realize, but as you're pointing out, it's something that can be done so easily and effectively. A lot of times, naturally, when we're sitting at work, we may find ourselves feeling very intimidated by something that's going on, plays back into all those old messages that we may have about not feeling that we're the brightest one in the room or the most capable or whatever it may be. And so a lot of times in a situation like that, as you mentioned, the bilateral stimulation can't be something overtly pronounced, but the brain can perceive even the most minute of movements, as you know. And so oftentimes what I'll tell clients is when you're sitting there in the meeting, if you really feel like, you're feeling the need for some extra encouragement, some extra focus, you start to feel some anxiety coming on, all you need to do is to go ahead and, in your shoes, just go ahead and move your toes, just like this, one after another. Nobody else is seeing it, nobody else is aware of it, and yet at the same time, you're able to say, okay, in your head, while you're doing the bilateral stimulation with your toes, why am I anxious? What's causing this anxiety right now? Oh, I realize it's because Joe over there, who's always trying to interrupt and always trying to assert himself, is tapping his pencil. I know that means he's getting ready to go ahead and say something. Okay, so I'm just going to kick back, relax, let him say what he's going to say, and then I'll follow up with something right after that can be just as witty, just as significant. But the point is, oftentimes in a moment like that when we're anxious, we can't even find our focus on what it is that's causing the anxiety. The anxiety overtakes us, plays into all of our negative fears and concepts about ourselves that, as you mentioned, have been neurally laid down early on. But if we can jump into the space in the moment of using that bilateral stimulation to bring us back to a sense of stasis, bring us back to a sense of focus, all of a sudden we're more in control again of our own thoughts, our own ideas, and where we can next take the conversation of the idea that we were lost in the process of all the anxiety. So the idea of bilateral stimulation, as you mentioned, is so easy, so simple. Little did we realize when we were first walking out on the plains of the savannah that the very aspect of walking was a simple way of being able to go ahead and alleviate our anxiety. But that's how far back bilateral stimulation goes, as we know, is from the availability of us as human beings to be able to use any aspect of being able to have a right-left movement in order to be able to create change, whether we use that with our eyes, our hands, our feet, whether we simply do it by playing an instrument, whatever it might be. We are engaging our mind in ways that cause us to feel a level of stasis and at the same time a level of new creativity and calm and problem solving all at the same time. So bilateral stimulation is definitely the rock on which all of us, whether we realize it or not, we're kind of formulated on in order for our brains to be able to grow and expand.
as you say, like part of the reason why we feel so much better when we go for a walk is because we're right-lefting. And when you're right-lefting, right, left, right, or running, and you go out for a walk or run after dinner, you know, like think about things, and you have these new insights, and you feel so much better. Well, it's not the endorphins, or I mean, it's partly the endorphins. We all know about those endorphins. But what most people don't know is that it's the bilateral stimulation. It gets this crosstalk going between the two hemispheres, and it really increases the crosstalk between the two hemispheres and balances, this is an oversimplification, but balances the right and the left. And I was reading recently that a lot of these corporations now are getting their high performers and their creatives to have treadmills in their office. So I wish I could show you a picture of it. There's a big treadmill, and they're walking, and the computer's on, and the phone, and they're walking. While they're walking, they're working. And the premise is that it's the exercise that will help to make them more creative. No, it's not the exercise. It's not the exercise. Certainly the exercise is good for us, and it helps. It's the bilateral stimulation. And I think you and I could save these corporations a ton of money by just providing them with a bilateral CD of beautiful sound and music and nature sounds that is not stereo. It goes back and forth, and you can talk on the phone, and you can do your work on your computer and be hyper creative, because bilateral stimulation has been proven to enhance creativity. We don't know why, but that's the truth. And so it always makes me laugh every time. I wish, we're trying to get the word out about bilateral stimulation, because it's so easy. And yes, the tapping in your shoes, your toes, or squeezing right, left. So I'm going to try and show you this. If you let me hold my hands. Anywhere you are, you can squeeze right, left. Just a gentle squeezing, just like that. Back and forth, just squeeze. My husband has really bad claustrophobia sometimes, and he was on the verge of a really bad attack in the subway, and he began to squeeze right, left like this, and it worked. It worked a miracle. It really calmed him down. Your nervous system cannot help but respond to right, left stimulation by slowing down and relaxing. Yes.
Chris, that you mentioned, one of the things too, Chris, that you mentioned that is so significant, that subtle movement that you mentioned that your husband uses for his claustrophobia, perfect. And another thing that oftentimes in situations where people feel a level of tension or some anxiety or kind of an overwhelm, they don't even realize that, as you mentioned before, something as simple as tapping on their legs, that type of thing. When I'm having to take my dog to the vet, for instance, so it works with animals as well, because again, they have a neurological system that is set up with a right-left hemisphere brain, that when he starts to get tense or whatever, when the vet is examining him, or when he's going to have to get a shot or there's some kind of treatment, I very simply put my hands on either side of him, and right up by his shoulders, I just lightly tap. I do it in a slower motion, as you were mentioning with the hands. You don't want to do it really fast, because that actually can elevate the level of activation and make somebody feel more stressful or experience a greater level of anxiety or whatever it might be. But just very slowly tapping back and forth on his shoulders, and he noticeably calms down dramatically, even when the most extreme of procedures is being performed. So it's one of those things where, as you mentioned, we have the availability to bring ourselves calm anywhere we are without having to worry about whether or not anybody even sees what's going on, because we have the subtlety of the ability to be able to move the right or left side of our body, or tap the right or left side of our body in the most unobservable of ways, and yet at the same time bring ourselves to a sense of ease without anybody even realizing what's going on.
It's one of the greatest secrets on earth. And the other thing, of course, we tell children also is to do let me see if I can demonstrate this, a butterfly hug. We call it a butterfly hug in the biz. And it's a right-left squeezing, holding, and adults can do it too, but it's nice to use that phrase, butterfly hug. So you're you have your arms crossed and your right, left squeezing without anybody having any idea that it's going on, and it helps. It helps incredibly. It helps kids also, and bilateral stimulation has been shown to enhance creativity and increase help kids to get better grades with studying. And I mean, the benefits are bottomless, and they're the same benefits that you get from taking a walk after dinner. The other thing I wanted to say is that one of the reasons that you can go back in time to a certain extent with bilateral stimulation and revisit the past and make these circumstances change, where you get, in the visualization, you get a different outcome. Again, we can't change what actually happened to us, but we can go back in and revisit it and fix it. And that helps our brain then to release us from the trauma of what actually happened. And the reason that works is because our brain does not know the difference between fantasy and reality. The brain does not know the difference between fantasy and reality. That's why dreams and nightmares especially feel so real, because as far as the brain is concerned, it's actually happening. And so when you envision and visualize a new outcome, when you go back and rescue that 3-year-old who's being abused or who's being told she's stupid, when you go back and confront your father and protect that child, as far as the brain is concerned, that really happened. And so it responds by creating the beginnings of a new network that supports that outcome and that belief of I'm entitled to take care of myself, I'm good enough, and so on. And that's mainly because the brain doesn't know the difference. And so when I think I was about 5, and I'll never forget this, I could not get out of the baby pool. In order to get out of the baby pool and move into the big pool with the porpoises, I had to be able to float, and I couldn't float. I tried, I would flounder around, I couldn't float. And so the night before, I wanted this so badly, I wanted to get out of the baby pool. So the night before the swimming test, the following morning, I don't know how I knew to do this, it came so naturally. I literally stayed up all night visualizing floating. I visualized floating. And by the time I got to the baby pool, I had floated successfully so many times in my brain that as far as that my brain was concerned, I was already there. And so I got into the pool, I floated, no problem. I got out of the baby pool and I became a porpoise. And it was because my brain finally had the experience. I gave my brain the experience of winning, of getting the thing that I wanted. And in the 70s, the Russians started doing all of this stuff with visualizing in the Olympics. And they would practice their routines in their head. They were the first ones to do it. And they started winning all of the contests. And it was because they were visualizing. We've done studies now where we can see that you take one group that does exercises and then measure how much stronger they get. And then you take another group and you have them imagine doing exercise, the same exercises but only in their head. And you compare after a week, and the results are almost identical. Almost identical. The brain does not know the brain doesn't know the difference. This is so basically we don't have to go and exercise, just imagine it. And I think that it's like, I'm looking over here, it's that 30% was physical exercise. People who actually did the physical exercise got 30% stronger. People who just imagined it only got 22% stronger. So when you learn something, the wiring in your brain moves. And I see we have a question. What if the negative messages started before I was really verbal? how do I reset those messages? Well, that's a great question. Valerie, do you want to comment on that? Or one of the things is that, you just let me know if you want to say anything. One of the things you can do, you may not know exactly what those messages are, or maybe you have a sense of them, but they're carried in your body for sure. And and you had another. Okay, okay. So when you were in the womb, probably your mother was depressed, and then you came out, and she was depressed, like for like for 7 years. And so even if you couldn't put words to your experience, your body, mind, it's all connected. Certainly internalize that. We don't get along very well. Certainly internalize that experience. So one of the things that you could do, and certainly you would do if you were in my office, for example, is that I would ask you probably to put on the bilateral soundtrack, and let yourself feel whatever this feeling is that you have about, I don't know what the negative belief is, but just see if you can let yourself feel it. Irritation, general irritation. Just see if you can let yourself feel it, with the soundtrack going, the bilateral soundtrack going. See if you can feel it, and then notice where you feel it in your body. And then just close your eyes and let your mind travel. And what happens is that when we get out of the way of ourselves, when we get out of the way of our brain knows how to heal. We don't have to know how it happens. We just have to get out of the way and see what happens. So your brain is automatically going to deliver information that might not even make logical sense, but it doesn't matter. It's delivering it to you, and it is being processed especially with bilateral stimulation, and it can really, really shift. So that's a short answer to a complicated question, but anyway, yes.
Well, I wanted to add to that. The question that Valerie asked was a really good one. And you did a fine job of answering it, Chris. I know that from my own experiences, in terms of being able to use bilateral stimulation to be able to get at issues, we all have things that for a long period of time, prior to the point that we actually had the ability as a little person growing up, there's a long period of time that we don't have language to be able to express our thoughts and ideas. And that doesn't mean that we're not perceiving things. The only difficulty is now when we're adults, now even when we're young children, we have the ability to say, no, I don't like that, or yes, that I agree, or no, I don't want to do that, or whatever it might be, or is that true? But prior to having language, not only do we not have the ability to speak our thoughts, but we also don't have the necessary components in place to be able to properly assimilate what may be being said to us. I worked for many, many years with individuals with extreme disabilities, people who with traumatic brain injuries, individuals with severe forms of mental illness or dual diagnosis with also a developmental disability. And one of the things that was clear was that so often the way that something would be said had more impact than what it actually was that was said. And a perfect example of that is I can say to you, hello, or I can say to you, hello, or I can say to you, hello. I haven't really changed much about my facial expression, but the tone of my voice is very much relaying very different kinds of emotional ideas to you about what it is that I may be saying. Well, to an infant who has no idea what hello, or come over here, or I'm going to hold you over here, whatever, it's the tone that oftentimes can leave such profound impressions on us. We can have somebody say, I love you, or we can have somebody say, I love you. Now there I've added something to it with my facial expression, but I can give you a wide-eyed look and say, I love you, and I can also have the wide-eyed look and say, I hate you. And the two things together don't necessarily mean the same thing, but the expression can be the same. So oftentimes what we don't realize is that we've received nonverbal messages as children that came through the way that somebody conveyed something to us, no matter what the words were, or that the words themselves had an impact and they didn't even necessarily relate to what the emotions were. But again, if we were a pre-verbal person ourselves and did not have language in order to be able to articulate within our own mind, it's not just a matter of whether or not we can articulate that language to someone else. Wow, it really bothered me, Mom, when you said. It could be within ourselves. Wow, it really bothered me when Mom said to me. But if we didn't have language, the only way we might be able to articulate for ourselves the fact that we didn't like what Mom said to us was, because that's the only way inside of us that we had to be able to express it before we had language to help us logic the whole process out. So when you stop and you look at that and you think about now as an adult, say somebody's wanting to think about, why is it that Mom and I have such an icky relationship? Oftentimes, it does go back to those pre-verbal periods of time, and before we can actually do anything about it, we need to be able to access those pre-verbal experiences. And as you're mentioning, Chris, this is where something that has to do with bilateral stimulation and therapies and different kinds of procedures and methodologies for using bilateral stimulation can activate the brain so that we're able to get back to those spaces that we do not even have the ability to be able to necessarily describe. We only have the ability to be able to revisit them by a visual sense. They come to us in a holographic-like way when we're in the process of having our mind bilaterally stimulated by, as you mentioned, bilateral sound, bilateral movement, whatever it might be, that allows us to be able to suddenly see the things we don't have words for to describe, a scene that's rolling out in front of us, but a scene that once we have the ability to be able to see it, our now verbal brain and now our verbal personhood is allowed to be able to say, wow, that was really not cool. What would I have said if I could have said something then? And then be able to take that experience through an actualized process in our mind, because we're seeing it just the way we would see a movie on the screen or a television show on the TV, and engage or interact with it. It's kind of like we're going through an actualization of a Skype experience of our past, and able to talk to Mom or Dad as who we are now, looking through that little person's eyes that we were, or come into it as if we're in a third person situation and look at our little person self, look at our mom or our dad or our evil uncle or whatever it may be, and say, wow, it's not cool for you to do that. I think it's inappropriate, da-da-da, and use the words that we now have available, because the bilateral stimulation allows that whole scenario to unfold before us as if it's a reality, as you've mentioned.
Yes, and then I once again I want to comment on the absolute genius of the brain, that all of that activity, where is that screen? But it unfolds like it's a movie. For all of us, when you're daydreaming, it unfolds like it's a movie, and yet it's a movie that has no address. It's out there somewhere. I love that. I just love the idea that we can't find where that place is. Yes. And okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's at that theater that's always near you. This one right here.
Yeah, in the theater near you. Yeah.
Well, I think we've lost Chris. I'm not sure how many other people we have available right now, but until Chris is able to rejoin the chat, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Additionally, it is important to understand that there are places available to be able to access bilateral sound or bilateral music, so that you have the opportunity to be able to use it and work with it with yourself. It's a wonderful tool, say, if you're jogging, you're going out for a jog, rather than just popping on your iPod with your usual music, put this on your iPod and go ahead and use it for the opportunity to be able to work through anything that's going on, anything you want to think about, any creative ways that you want to be able to utilize it. You can put your thoughts to anything and utilize bilateral sound and bilateral music to activate creative problem-solving, creativity, ways of being able to get past issues that may be creating anxiety, depression, whatever it might be. Or you can also use it for things that have to do with building self-confidence, building self-esteem, building capability. Anything that you want to use bilateral sound for to get rid of the negative or to accentuate the positive is absolutely available. Now, you can find bilateral sound at a couple of different places. For instance, you can find it at Ranck.com. Christine has some bilateral cuts available. You can also find some at my website, BrookLeighSheldon.com. That's BrookLeighSheldon.com, BrookLeighSheldon.com. Also, too, you can find some at bilateral.com, which is David Graham's site, who is the developer of Brain Spotting, which uses bilateral sound in his therapeutic component. There's so many different ways, and I'll go over those things again so that you can have the opportunity to catch those websites again. But there are so many different ways that you can utilize bilateral sound in order to be able to, again, accentuate the positive or to rid yourselves of the negative. One of the things that I think is important, and again, we're waiting for Christine Ranck, who is the host of this show, Christine is back. Here she is. Okay, so here, I'll go ahead and pass the show back to Christine, and we will go over those websites again before we're done.
Oh my goodness, no, don't, continue. I'm sure you were, I don't know, my computer just went down. So it sounded like you were giving websites where you could get more information about therapy and bilateral soundtracks and so on. And so, I'm going to put you back on and you can finish.
Actually, what I had done, and we can do it again before the end of the show, was I was just letting your audience know a little bit more about the fact that, again, as we've mentioned, you can accentuate the positive or you can eliminate the negative using bilateral sound and bilateral stimulation. And then what I did was I wanted to make it clear to them that, there were places immediately accessible to be able to reach that, in which I mentioned that your website, ChristineRanck.com, does offer bilateral sound cuts that would be available for people to download. My website, Brook Leigh Sheldon, BrookLeighSheldon, BrookLeighSheldon.com, and also bilateral.com, which is Dr. David Graham's website, has cuts available. And that these are all places where people can listen, find bilateral music that works for them. And as I mentioned, you can use it for a workout. If there's things you want to be focusing on as you're running, instead of, putting on your iPod with whatever music you might normally listen to, go ahead and stick some of these cuts onto your iPod and use those when you're running or you're doing yoga or you're meditating, whatever it might be. Use that as an opportunity to focus on the things you want to grow in and focus on the things that potentially you want to eliminate, and use bilateral sound to lead you to those new opportunities of growth within yourself. So that's what was going on while I was making sure that we could find a way to get you back on.
Okay, I don't know what happened. It just went out. So anyway, those are great suggestions, and it looks like it's about time for us to stop anyway. So first of all, I want to thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much for coming on, and it was it was great to obviously to have somebody to talk to and a great great conversation and and a lot of laughs. I'm just going to turn it back over to you to see if there's anything else you want to add. But thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Well, and again, I want to thank you, Chris, for this wonderful opportunity. It's been a lot of fun, and as you and I both know, we both share a tremendous interest and a commitment to how bilateral activation for individuals can not just take away some of the immediate things that they think of as going on in their lives, the things that may be making them depressed, but literally be able to reach back into their past and help them understand things that have to do with what's caused their anxiety or their concerns or their fears or the things that they can't find something for that they can immediately attach to and say, oh yeah, that's because of what happened last week or last month. But oftentimes, even the things that did happen last week or last month can be eliminated or diminished as things that create anxiety or fear or cause all kinds of consternation in their life by simply throwing on some bilateral sound, processing those things, holding them in their thoughts as they listen to the bilateral sound, eventually kind of letting the bilateral sound fade into the background and focus their attention on what it is that they want to either build or they want to eliminate in their lives. And the fascinating things that come up, and how wonderful it is to be in that theater of the mind while they're using bilateral sound. Can be a tremendous opportunity to enrich one's own life, and also the opportunity to understand oneself in a better way. So there's not enough good things that can be said about bilateral stimulation, bilateral sound, bilateral music. So thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to being able to talk with you again soon.
Yes, we'll definitely do it again, Brooke. Thank you again. And to those of you who are watching or have just tuned in, thank you so much for being here. I want to encourage you to remember that your brain can change, and these visualizations are very, very, very powerful. And changing the outcome in your mind is just as powerful as changing the outcome outside there, out in your life. And as you change the outcome in your mind by time traveling back to the times wherever this negative belief started, or whatever, if you imagine a different outcome and let yourself feel the results of that outcome, your brain will respond in kind by creating a new neural network that supports that new belief. And that is the miracle of your brain. And now that we know that, we're not going to let anybody forget it, because our brain can change, and everything that you're experiencing and feeling that doesn't work, it's a brain thing. It's a brain thing more than anything else. It is not a comment on you as a person or your worth or all of that is garbage. It's just noise. It's just noise that your brain has learned to deliver to you because it's like a bad habit. And we can change bad habits, and we can change these negative beliefs, and bilateral stimulation really helps with that. So thank you again for visiting with us, and please come back. I'm trying to do a talk show every Wednesday night at 8:30. And I want all of you to go out your door, have a dream, and then just get ignited. Thank you and good night.